Moonjumper here. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a brief shout out to Salty Trekker, one of the great sages of the internet. Over the last month or so, I've had the honor and pleasure of being a panelist on his show several times, talking all things Star Trek and sci-fi in general. Such wonderful and thought-provoking conversations with some fantastic panelists. John DeMarco, Gorilla Randoms, a great bunch of guys. Be sure to check them out as well. If you haven't checked out his channel, please be sure you do. That's Salty Trekker. I'll link him down below. Meanwhile, I've been doing a lot of Trek lately. Part 3 of Picard vs. Discovery is coming down the pike, but first, we're going to switch gears to DC's latest movie blockbuster, The Batman. My in-depth, yet spoiler-free review on this episode of Who Cares What I Think. Roll the tape. Good show.
Who cares what I think?
Moonjumper here, and welcome to Who Cares What I Think. Today's topic, a spoiler-free review of The Batman. I wouldn't say it sucked. Definitely not the worst Batman movie ever made. In a word, it wasn't bad. Not great, but not bad. The story was interesting, engaging. This iteration of Catwoman, played by Zoe Kravitz, was interesting. Not a bad Catwoman. She's gorgeous, good acting, if a bit millennial, for lack of a better term, just on that emotional level. Same thing with Bruce Wayne / Batman, a very millennial Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, both in a dark, brooding, emo kind of way. Although I actually liked Selina's character a lot better than this version of Bruce Wayne. She at least had something of a personality, someone with whom you can identify. Zoe Kravitz is good in the role. She's kind of brooding, but she's at least likable. And therein lies what is unfortunately the biggest weakness of the film, is the protagonist, Bruce Wayne, Batman. It's not the story, it's not the tone or setting, or all of the other characters and actors who are all pretty good for the most part. I'm not crazy about this version of the Riddler, but just stick a pin in that for a second. For the most part, it's pretty watchable. It's mostly apolitical. It's not screaming in your face with woke lectures where you're just cringing the whole time thinking, I'm being inundated day in and day out. Can't you please allow me just 2 hours of escape from all the politics? You own CNN, Warner Brothers. Go on CNN and preach all you want. Just let me watch a goddamn Batman movie. Grant me 2 hours, please. And this movie actually does that for the most part. But, you know, they can't help themselves. They always have to throw in something to appease the Twitter mob. There is one eye-rolling line that Selina drops on Batman, something about rich, corrupt people and their white privilege. But in this case, it at least made sense in the context of what was being discussed. This version of Selina is mixed race, having grown up on the streets in the shadow of dangerous mobsters, and here she is being lectured by Bruce Wayne, who is a white multi-billionaire. You know, kind of like the Oscars lecturing the rest of us little people. You can at least understand where she's coming from in this particular context. So it's a lot better written in terms of subtext than all the cringe woke lectures you get on the CW, for example.
No touching without consent.
It's at least a movie you can sit down for a couple hours, 3 hours actually, and relax and just escape. It's certainly worth the ticket price, particularly a matinee ticket. I always go to the matinee because I'm cheap and there's less people. But again, the problem with this movie, the reason I did not enjoy it as much as some previous Batman movies, was unfortunately the one reason anybody goes to see a Batman movie, and that's Batman. Robert Pattinson, fine actor. I've seen him in a couple of other things that he was good in. I'm sorry to say he is woefully miscast as Bruce Wayne. There is nothing about Robert Pattinson in either his look or, more importantly, his demeanor that makes me believe that he is Bruce Wayne. He doesn't look like Bruce Wayne, and he doesn't act like Bruce Wayne. There is no gravitas to this version of Bruce Wayne whatsoever. And I know, in this, he's supposed to be a younger version of Bruce Wayne, but still. Adam West, with all his campy tongue-in-cheek brought more weight to the role than Robert Pattinson. The skinny teenage kid from TV's Gotham had more gravitas as Bruce Wayne than Robert Pattinson does in this film. And it's not that his acting is bad, it's just not the right acting. I don't know what character he's playing, but it's not Bruce Wayne. He's playing some emo kid who's a complete monotone, antisocial recluse, with not even a dry sense of humor, that subtle wink and a nod that Bruce Wayne is often known for. But this depressing kid, playboy philanthropist, he is not. This is the first Bruce Wayne I've ever seen who is not even interested in supporting philanthropic causes.
Your family has a history of philanthropy, but as far as I can tell, you're not doing anything.
This kid would embarrass Ebenezer Scrooge. He's the first Bruce Wayne I've ever seen who acts darker and more brooding than when he puts on the cowl as Batman. The billionaire playboy has always been the true mask, the true costume, acting as a lighter front for the Dark Knight. And in this version, he's just dark and antisocial, period, to the point of being out of character. That's the irony of the whole thing. The movie is not that bad. It's decently written and shot. I give them major kudos for not making us sit through yet another rehash of Thomas and Martha Wayne being shot in the alley. We have seen that so many times, we get it. We don't need to watch it again, and they mercifully skipped it. There is no need to waste the screen time. We already know the story, so thank you for that. But Robert Pattinson, in my opinion, is the worst Bruce Wayne and arguably the worst Batman we've seen in the history of the franchise. And that's saying something because we've had Val Kilmer. And as far as when he's Batman, is he supposed to be Batman or Solomon Grundy? The Hulk is lighter on his feet than Batman is. Batman is supposed to be quick and stealthy. He's literally trained as a ninja. Not this Batman. Pattinson is kind of a skinny, small frame guy, but this Batman walks like Frankenstein with a heavy gait, slow and lumbering as though he weighs 800 pounds. Every step you hear is this boom, 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 boom. What? This is Batman? What happened to the ninja? The bad guy hears him coming and just runs away before Batman ever makes it across the room. This is a terrible Batman. And part of that is because in recent years they keep trying to turn Batman into Iron Man, to make it all about the heavy armored suit he is wearing instead of the man. Batman is not Iron Man. I remember when Batman didn't wear any armor, period. It was all about his skill and intellect. And I will give the makers of this film some credit for showcasing some of his intellectual detective skills. His ability to solve every puzzle the Riddler throws at him, although at times it seems a little too easy for him. Too instantaneous where he doesn't even have to think about it. But they do at least give us a hint of that classic Batman the detective, which some of the previous films tend to forget about and make it all about the action. But having this armored suit, which is so heavy and lumbering he can barely cross the room, that's not a good Batman, especially for a young Batman. And out of the suit, he's an even worse Bruce Wayne. Now, maybe Pattinson can mature and grow into the role, but this was one god-awful version of the Batman as a character. And part of that may be due to this growing modern misconception that Batman is supposed to be an asshole, that he's supposed to be so dark and brooding and damaged and humorless that he's supposed to be completely unlikable as a character. Batman was never like that in the comics or on screen until relatively recently. There is a happy medium between goofy Adam West Batman and, well, this. There's a nice, comfortable middle ground between these two terrifying extremes. And I can't think of a better example than Batman the Animated Series, the quintessential screen Batman in my opinion, who perfectly balanced a dark and tragic backstory, a rather obsessed character, with a character who is also compassionate, could smile and even crack a joke, even when he's wearing the cowl. This guy is so dark, he's just dull. He's boring as a character, and he's just an asshole. He's not likable at all. I remember when the first Justice League movie came out, and yeah, the Joss Whedon version sucked. I'm not defending it. But of all the things to complain about, I remember people being outraged over what I consider to be probably the best line in the whole movie.
What are your superpowers again? I'm rich.
That was a great line, and Ben Affleck delivered it perfectly. Very dry humor, and people were outraged. Batman's not supposed to crack jokes. That is not true. If you believe that Batman or Bruce Wayne is never supposed to crack a joke or a smile, that is a complete misreading and misunderstanding of the character. That's unlike any Batman I've ever known until now, or at least outside the Frank Miller reimagining of a angry, murderous elder Batman. But even The Dark Knight Returns represents an Elseworld what-if scenario. He was not meant to be the real Batman we all grew up with and admired. But apparently that's the misconception that the actor and or the director of this film seems to be operating under, which is unfortunate. I mean, even Christian Bale, who gave a real serious portrayal, had a certain twinkle in his eye. Not this guy. And I also didn't care for this version of the Riddler, a psycho serial killer behind a mask, a Jason Voorhees type in appearance, who bears no resemblance to the classic Riddler whatsoever except for the riddles he uses to taunt. He's actually an interesting villain. He's a very compelling villain. He's just not the Riddler. If anything, he's more reminiscent of Hush in terms of costume and personality. Now, to be fair, if that's what they are trying to do, to combine the characters of Hush and the Riddler, this movie, The Batman, and I'm trying to stay out of spoiler territory, so bear with me here, but let's just say this movie would not be the first DC film to try to make that connection. Admittedly, I have not followed every single comic storyline as closely as I would have when I was younger. So if there's something I'm missing here, by all means, politely let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. But from my understanding, Hush in the comics was originally a completely different character, a completely unrelated character from the Riddler, Edward Nygma, named Dr. Tommy Elliot. The animated movie Batman Hush seems to kind of muddy those waters. I'll just leave it at that. But that seems to be the influence here, what this movie is trying to do as well. As a traditionalist, I'm of the mind if you want to do Hush, then have the balls to do Hush. If you want to do the Riddler, then have the balls to go full-blown Riddler. But pick one and own it. Otherwise, it just diminishes the integrity of both characters, two iconic characters. But I have a sneaking suspicion what may have happened. Now, I'm just speculating. I don't know this to be true, but I suspect that the filmmakers actually wanted to do Hush. They wanted to do something dark and gritty and grounded, but the studio said, oh no, no one outside the core fandom has ever heard of Hush, but everyone on the planet has heard of the Riddler. In the risk-averse studio mindset, which I disagree with because a great villain is going to become world famous regardless, but in the studio mindset, you have to do a villain that average moviegoers are familiar with. And I can just imagine the filmmakers thinking, oh man, I mean, the Riddler is just goofy and campy. No one's going to take the Riddler seriously in a grounded film. So okay, let's just do Hush, but we're going to call him the Riddler for marketing purposes. Even though he doesn't look like the Riddler, he doesn't act like the Riddler, he looks and acts like Hush because they wanted to do Hush, and the studio said no, it has to be a more familiar name. I would bet anything that's what happened here, and the results are unfortunate because he ends up being neither character. However, with that said, let me flip-flop on you and tell you that this Riddler in name only is actually a great villain, and extremely well acted by Paul Dano. The guy is truly terrifying in the role, but he is not the Riddler. He should have had a different name, like maybe Hush, or no reason he couldn't be an original character. The comics would adopt him, they do it all the time, but Riddler? Nah, I don't buy it. There's also a version of Penguin in this film, played by Colin Farrell, who on one level I actually kind of like. He's very grounded. He's actually just a plain old mob guy. He's not the waddling cartoon character, wah, 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 that we know from Burgess Meredith and Danny DeVito. He's just a regular guy.
So, take it easy, sweetheart.
I'm not sure why someone named Oswald Cobblepot is suddenly Italian. Of course, maybe that's why they only call him Oz. They completely avoid his last name. Of course, he doesn't actually have to be ethnically Italian. Maybe that's just the New York-style mafia underworld type that he grew up with and grew up in. But this grounded version of the Penguin, yeah, it's a different take, but I liked it. it worked for me. And I know that seems like a complete contradiction to what I just said about the Riddler, and maybe it is, but I just liked it. And there is a difference. You look at Colin Farrell and the makeup he's wearing, it's subtle, but there's still a spark of recognition there. There's a sense that, yeah, that's the Penguin. I don't get that recognition with the Riddler. He's just not the Riddler. By the way, it has been announced by DC, by Warner Brothers, that Colin Farrell's Penguin is getting his own series on HBO Max, which, well, that interests me a lot more than Peacemaker does, for sure. I did like Alfred and Jim Gordon in this. I think there's a lot of Gotham influence on this movie. I'm talking about the TV series Gotham. For decades, the Alfred we all knew was this very posh, very sophisticated British butler, the stereotypical Mr. Belvedere type. And Gotham changed that in a way that I'm rather fond of. This rebooted Alfred was a former British SAS badass who came up from the very blue-collar streets of London with a barely legible Cockney dialect, hardly the Queen's English. There was already a hint of that in the Christian Bale movies with Michael Caine's portrayal, but it was Sean Pertwee in Gotham who I think kind of rewrote the book on how Alfred Pennyworth is now portrayed. Pertwee's Alfred became the basis for the Gotham prequel series Pennyworth, where Jack Bannon portrays a young former special ops soldier surviving the London underworld. And that's the exact kind of persona that Andy Serkis is bringing to the role. And I don't think that's an accident. You know, of course, Andy Serkis is kind of that persona anyway, but I think that's why they hired him. I think the gruffer personality that Sean Pertwee brought to the role of Alfred Pennyworth kind of struck a chord and is now being adopted and adapted to the greater expanded Bat universe. And you see some Gotham influence with the Penguin and his association with the Falcone family, a little Batman the Animated Series influence thrown in there as well. John Turturro, he was fantastic as Falcone, the mob boss. John Turturro is always fantastic, but he was especially good in this. He was so subtle and quiet and charming and chilling as the head of the Falcone Empire. Man, if only the lead character Batman, Bruce Wayne, was even half as good as some of his co-stars, this might have been an incredible film. Unfortunately, because Batman was so bad in this movie, the Batman, he really dragged this movie down into the mediocre. I want to give it a better grade, yet I'm afraid a C+ is the best I can do. But who cares what I think? From deep in the heart of Texas, I am Moonjumper. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, clang that notification bell, and let me know what you thought of The Batman down in the comments below. Maybe you think Robert Pattinson is a great Bruce Wayne. That's cool. Tell me about it. I want to hear from you. Just as always, please keep it civil and family friendly. And don't forget to also find me on Rumble at rumble.com/MoonjumperReviews WCWIT. And I'll see you next time.